Professor Ronel and with Sharon and Tuli Nirim. It will be a unique experience. I'm sure I spoke to Jonathan now. Whatever you'll do is something that will surprise you and show you something new. I don't think you ever saw anything like that. Well, yes. No pressure.
You start.
The worst thing to do to a lecturer is to raise such expectations that
I didn't say it will be good.
Surprising and new.
Thank you very much, Shabtai, for introducing us in such a way. Good morning, everyone. I welcome you for coming here and thank you for being with us. Let us leave everything that we do. Please, if you can fold down your screens, it will be even better. And we'll just
collect our telephones.
And we'll just take a short moment of silence. You may close your eyes if you like. We'll just be in silence. We leave aside everything that we came with, any expectations, and we try to listen to the silence that is within. Although some noises comes, we can stop our natural attention to them and just listen to the silence. And it is a very pleasant feeling of listening to the silence, exploring the silence within. Now, to this silence, let us bring a memory, a moment, an event, a situation that we experienced as unpleasant recently. Not very unpleasant, a little bit unpleasant. Anything, whatever comes in our mind. Let us look at it from a side, without judging it, without identifying with it, looking at like we witness it, although we are involved. And let's take another such an event, memory, picture of ourselves when it was unpleasant. And a third one. What happened to the silence? Let's go back to the silence that was before. Leave aside everything that was unpleasant. Just be in silence. Very refreshing silence. And now let's put in our mind a pleasant moment, event, situation, something that was pleasant for us, a recent one. Still let's look at it from a side, witnessing it, knowing it is pleasant, enjoying it in a way, but only looking at it. And let's take another one. And a third one. let's go back to the silence. Try to avoid any attachment to any thought, feeling, or idea. Just looking at what happened with silence. Maybe we can look at our breath. Air comes in, air comes out. That's it. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
What we'll attempt to do here is to describe or to show what we call applied spirituality, pragmatic spirituality, practical spirituality. The three of us are therapists. We work with people. Tuli is a social worker and a criminologist. Sharon is a criminologist. Myself, I'm also a criminologist. And we work with people. We have clinics besides our academic works. And three of us, when working, we try to apply spirituality in our everyday work. The distinction I made just now between pleasant and unpleasant situations, event, memories, is very natural to us. It is also very beneficial for us. It helps us to survive in the world. We know what is pleasant, what is good, what is positive for us, and what is negative, unpleasant, maybe dangerous, maybe risky. And usually it works well. It keeps us surviving. Psychology many times is based on this distinction between what is pleasant and what is unpleasant. Behaviorism, of course, negative and positive reinforcement, etc. Also, sociology sometimes look at it, at human experiences from this perspective. And as said, most of the times it is very beneficial for us, so we keep on with this. From different reasons, at different times, for some people, it doesn't work anymore. Let's take, for example, Maya. I brought her with me. You can see Maya here. She is about 30 years old. Nice looking, considered to be nice looking young woman. Of course, she doesn't know for herself she is nice looking. She doesn't believe it. She comes from a very wealthy family, and that gives her whatever she likes. And for her, what is very pleasant is doing drugs, and doing a lot of drugs, getting stoned, and doing alcohol with drugs, and going with men while doing drugs. Wrong men, wrong relationships, wrong results, and she keeps on doing it. So what is pleasant for her is actually dangerous for her. The more pleasant for her, the more it is dangerous for her. Fortunately enough for her, there are results. Results are unpleasant. Since she likes very much the pleasant and dislike the unpleasant, what she does is go on with more of the pleasant that she knows. It means doing more drugs in order to get rid of the results of doing drugs. Going with more men to be accepted by them, even though the relationship are bad for her. being stuck in bed all day long without having the ability to raise herself to job, even though she knows it could be better for her. So for Maya, pleasant and unpleasant are confused. We may say Maya finds herself in a very powerless situation where there is the very beneficial distinction between pleasant and unpleasant doesn't work, and the more she tries with what she knows, the worse it comes. Is it the only distinction between experiences? Is it the most beneficial one? We can divide human experiences actually according to many categories. Another category, which might be somehow supportive to Maya and to other people as well, is looking at the experiences that we just now had in our mind differently. Let's do it together. Go back to some of these experiences that you previously had and see them, what was directed outward or caused by the outer world, by people, by the world, and what was from within, purely from within, ours from within, those experiences. Pleasant or unpleasant, it's not important now. What was from within and what was from the outer world. It could be amazing to do sharing now, but we won't do it. When we are honest enough with ourselves, we see that most of our experiences are outward directed or influenced by the outer world. Even when I'm mad about something, the driver that blocked my way or whatever, my rage comes from within, but it is directed to the other person, and it was caused, so-called I blame the other person for raising my own anger. In all of these situations, which actually constitute most of our ordinary life, we are conditioned by the world. We actually have no free will because everything is caused by the world or directed towards the world to bring more satisfactory experiences, more pleasant ones, etc., and to avoid the unpleasant. It means that whenever our attention is towards the world, we are influenced, we are impacted by the world, and actually we are controlled by the world. And sometimes it might go out of control, as it happens to Maya and to many other people that we criminologists meet on our everyday. Can there be another experience of something which is absolutely inner, which is not influenced by the outer world, is not caused by the outer world, is not directed to the outer world? As far as I see it, this is where spirituality comes in. Professor Faust described as the nice Indian parable about the elephant and the blind man. Rumi, the great Islamic Sufi sage, described it a little bit different. He described the four men entering a dark room where they can see nothing. And there is an object within the room, and each of them touches this object and describe, and they think they have different objects. And then Rumi adds, when they light a candle, they will see that it is one object and everything will be solved for them. All arguments will be solved. Spirituality lies in this moment of lighting a candle. It actually directs us how to light this candle, and it helps us to light this candle. Spirituality, as far as I understand it, says that the light of the candle is already there. But how to see it? How can we see it? We work with people who live in darkness and also can't run away of this darkness anymore. They must face the fact that their life became darkness. They are fortunate enough to have this experience. On this basis, we can assist them. Now, there are explanations of why these people experience this darkness, this total blackness. We have psychological good explanations, we have sociological good explanations, criminological ones, victimological ones, etc., or logical ones. But still there is darkness. We can help them with these explanations to reduce a little bit this darkness, but we accept the main point that this is darkness. Spirituality says something else. The nature of darkness, the reason, the causes for the darkness are important, but not as much. What can be more important for us is how to end this darkness, how to bring the light in. Let me give you an example. Another young lady, she came to me, she was in her mid-20s. She was raped since she was 7-8 years old by different men. Some of them even didn't know they raped her because she was used to say yes to everyone who wanted her. So in her experience, it was re-raped, re-victimized, but for them it was relationship with an open woman, open-minded woman. She couldn't say no. And she came from a traditional Jewish family background. And after 1 year of meetings, which she was improved a little bit, otherwise she wouldn't come, she found the courage to say, where was God when I was raped? How comes God exists and he didn't help me? And it was a lot of courage for her to say it, because it's forbidden to say you don't speak against God. Fire will come out of the sky. You say nothing against God. But she was courage enough after 1 year of so-called therapy to say it loudly. And it is a challenge that she raised to me. My answer was that first, I'm not the spokesman of God. I can't explain God, where was God those moments. But I can tell you one thing, assure you one thing. From my own experience and the experience of the people that I met, that if one finds God in one's life at this present, and leaving aside the past and these questions about the past, something good happens to us. I didn't know when I said so what will be the results. It was just, as far as I saw it, it was the fact. But it became to be a game-changing point for her. I went abroad, so I couldn't see her for a few weeks. She did reserve in the army, so she went to reserve.
Reserve service.
Reserve service, yes. And then it was a month and a half when we met again, and she was another woman. It was based on previous experience, but then it was something that needed to be touched, and well, I couldn't imagine it would be like this, but she was another woman. No more victimized. There was a case during that service in the army when someone tried to get advantage over her, and it was the first time she said, no, it will not happen. And for her it was life-changing. And then she found God. I still see her from time to time, many years afterwards, and she's doing well. What I am describing you is practical way of applying spirituality in our life, spiritual attitude. I call it Grace Way. Actually, 2 days ago, my first book about Grace Way was published in Hebrew. The English readers can be more lucky because it's on Amazon for already half a year. And I call it the 12 Tools, very much related to the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, of course. And what I did now was actually speaking the language of the STEP program, in a way. And what was developed in this book and during my practice with people is very simple tools of applying spirituality in our life. And the tools goes from abstinence, of course, from the Serenity Prayer, which are known in the Alcoholics Anonymous, and to other tools that were developed by the years based on my experience with people or the experience that I saw with other people, etc. Let us do another exercise, and then I'll leave the floor to Tuli and Sharon. Let's go back into silence. Try to enjoy the silence. Just be in silence. Now let's put in our mind a picture of ourselves of one of the few last days, any moment. The content is not important, just that we see ourselves behaving, any behavior, any situation. And now let's take another memory of ourselves behaving about 5, 6, 7 years ago. Whatever. Just see it from a side without judging it. Like it was someone else even. And now let's take another memory of maybe 15 years ago. Short moment of us behaving, any kind of behavior. And let's take final one from our childhood. Any memory that comes up from our childhood. See ourselves as children behaving, acting, playing, whatever. Thank you. Different times in our lives, different memories, different people? Might be. We behave differently, we reacted differently to the world. Who is the one who knows these differences? Who is the one who perceives these differences? Who is the one who witnesses these differences? Is this one also under change? Is the awareness that was there during all these moments is changeable, or it is not changeable? The very pure consciousness. I did this exercise with Maya when she was very much depressed because she had a relapse and she felt very bad afterwards. It was relapse with drugs and men and being stuck with anxiety and depression at home. Very bad weekend. And it was, I think it was on Sunday when we met. It is a good day to meet her to try to fix the weekends. And out of my powerlessness to help her, I tried this exercise, which is usually, I do it with people who are in quite an advanced stage. But I tried whatever I can with her, so I tried this. And then she says something which was very, very nice. She said, and it took her very shortly to say it. Well, it is I equal I, without anything else. Purely I. Ani in Hebrew. Ani. I. It means I with no attributes. I with no content. I with no thinking, ideas, whatever. I, which is stable, which is there. In a group of people, they were addicted to drugs and they are on recovery, some of them for 30 years, some of them for 20 years. And we used to meet once in 2 weeks. I did the same exercise. And one man said, it is I with no I. And they say the same, he and she say the same. Because he said I with no all the attributes that we are used to identify with. And if we look at our suffering, and I work with people who suffer a lot. And if we look at our suffering, we see that our suffering is always a reaction, an attachment, an identification with something. Pain is there. We can't avoid pain in the world. Pain is there. Suffering is the meaning we attribute to pain. And our attempts to avoid suffering or to avoid pain brings more suffering, as I told you about Maya. So she did whatever she knew to avoid pain, which caused more suffering for her. And the circle went on and on. But spirituality opens for us a different perspective, a different way of dealing with ourselves, a different opportunity, and sometimes a different life. Now, Sharon.
It's always a challenge to talk after Natti.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's why you gave it to me,
Yeah.
right? And you'll speak after me. Thank you.
I can have more time to think about how to react to what is
I love you also too.
So hello everybody, hello again to some of you. As continues to what Natti said, because Natti spoke of suffering and of pain. First I would like to tell you that I am a criminologist, a rehabilitative criminologist, but in fact I'm much more of a victimologist. This means that I work with people who were victimized and more specifically people who were sexually violenced, victims of sexual violence. No, I don't. I say violence because it's not just abuse. Sometimes it's harassment. Sometimes it's sexual violence in general. I think I work with people that, and I also research victimology. This is my research, which I would like to tell you about. What I do with them, and it's very difficult for me to call myself a therapist because I don't think that I treat people and I don't think that I take care of them. I think that I am of service to them in some way and just helping them realize what is already within them. And the way I do that, or how I call it, is spiritual rehabilitation from trauma, from victimization. And as I told you on Sunday, some of you who were there, that spiritual victimology, as we are developing a theory, I think that it's the title of my research, but I think the three of us are developing it together. And what it is to me is the journey from victimization to liberation, meaning for a person to be free of the suffering, because pain is there, as Natti said, but the suffering doesn't have to be there. For a person to do that, to be free of suffering, they need to transform, to have something different in their life, to have a different perspective of life. Now, the starting point of that is being a victim, because I usually work with women, but it's also true for men. The starting point is to be a victim. And we talk about self-centeredness, meaning the experience of a person, of the world around him, that everything is experienced from my point of view, from this self-centeredness point of view. And spirituality as defined, as Natti defined it, as Rabbi Dresser defined it, is the journey from self-centeredness to God-centeredness. Now, to be a victim, or to identify as a victim, to have a victim, as Natti also said, is usually there is a phenomena of re-victimization, is being victimized again and again and again. And when you're being victimized over and over again, you gain an identity of a victim. You start thinking yourself a victim, and your self-centeredness also becomes a victimized self-centeredness. Everything is experienced from your point of view, but the point of view is also always of a victim. And the main question that a person who identifies themselves as a victim is, why is this happening to me? And this question is always there. Where was God, or why? How can such horrible things happen? And why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? I'm going to tell you something about the path that I went through with my research. I started with this question in mind, with one question. It was even a semi-hidden agenda, because I did write it as a research question, but I didn't empathize how important it was for me. But for me, that was the main question. Why do bad things happen, not just to good people, but why does it happen at all? And I interviewed in my research, is phenomenal research, so I'm going to tell you the story of this. I'm not going to give you numbers and statistics, but just a story. Or not just, but a story. I interviewed women who were victimized, sexually victimized, and found some spiritual coping method and some sort of spiritual coping method. I interviewed therapists who have a spiritual agenda or tendency, thank you, and spiritual leaders such as yourself and teachers. But what I really wanted to know, I wanted to know this is actually why I interviewed spiritual leaders, because I thought the leaders will tell me the root of it, the spiritual root to it. Why do bad things happen? Why such horrible things? Why is there so much suffering? And asked the women, and the women gave me a variety of answers. They told me I can categorize it to three answers. They said we don't know. Some of them, we don't know why it happened, and those women who told me that they don't know why it happened, they were still in suffering. They didn't know why it happened. The women who told me, some of the women told me, we know exactly what happened. I mean, if it's a spiritual answer, maybe they got it from a therapist, maybe they got it from a spiritual leader, maybe somebody told them, or maybe they figured it out for themselves. And they told me, we know exactly what happened. The more common reasons were karma or reincarnation or just tikkun, what we say is a correction. Yeah, that's correction, but tikkun sounds more accurate to me. So it was, and this convention is Tikkun Olam, so I'm sure that by now you know what is Tikkun. So they said this is one of the more common reasons, Tikkun, and they said we know exactly why it's happened, and they were not suffering because they had a reason. The most common, and the average answer, or the more common answer was, I don't know why it happened, but I'm sure there is a reason. I know that there is a reason. I'm just not interested in the reason, or I haven't found the reason. I'm not even looking for the reason. But the knowing that there is a reason gave them a peace of mind. They know that there is a reason, and that was enough for them.
The reason you mean they deserve it, in the sense that they deserve it?
Nobody said they deserved it. But well,
it's a good question.
It is a good question, because some women said, I don't want to say we deserve it, but but I can't think of a better word for it, because maybe I did something in my past life. I mean, a woman told me, not just one, but in particular one woman told me, in my past life I was a really bad man, and I heard it a lot of women. And so this is my tikkun, this is my correction. So I do deserve this. So I do deserve this. Somebody did say that to me.
But part of that is, in the course of my life, this is good.
In the course of my life, it's not a matter of good or bad. In the course of my life, it's exact. It what needed to happen, and more so. I know it's not easy to hear, but this is actual thing that people told me. And more, if it's good or bad, and it's accurate, and it's the question. I'll put it that way. The question of the liberated mind, or the liberated person, was not why it happened to me. Is what I'm doing with it now. And the professor spoke before us, Jeremy. I don't remember the last name. Said talk about meaning, and the most important thing for them was to find meaning. It already happened, and it doesn't matter why it happened. But what does matter is, what do I do with it now? How do I work with this? Because this thing happened and I cannot change it. It happened. What do I do with it? What is the meaning of it, and what meaning do I put to it?
They asked it themselves, or you directed them to ask?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't ask them the meaning. They told me that was for them. That was the spiritual awakening that happened to them at some point in their life. They started asking themselves. They reached a point of desperation, of total desperation, or some of them, or even doesn't matter how many, but they tried to kill themselves. They tried to cease of existence, and even using drugs and alcohol, and and going with men, and being a prostitute in themselves. Sorry for lack of a better word. That was a way for them to cease of existence, to not be here, not be in this world, because this world for them, their being was a being of suffering. They only suffered, so they wanted to transform to another place. If you want to ask me questions, just ask. I
Say
don't
it because
see.
she doesn't see.
And I am the blind person who's just looking for the elephant. So just ask away, okay? Just ask me the question.
Okay, there is one question from there.
Please.
How the way you are eating people is an individual person, or if it also has
No,
to
can you
do
please
with
speak
collective
louder?
people.
No,
They
from
don't
the
hear me.
top.
They don't-
שלם אולי.
אם
בעברית.
הייתי עושה that, if your therapy or your way of eating people is just for individual people or collective people.
Is
אם
it
זה
just
לקהילה
for?
או רק לאדם אחד? אם זה לכל
Is it for
הקהילה או רק
groups?
לאדם?
No, I also do groups. I also sit with groups, and one of the guidelines is God to our understanding, meaning everybody understand God in an individual way, because we're individuals and because everybody has their own mind and their own soul and maybe even their own task in life and their own mission or meaning. Then God has an individual understanding. Everybody understands God differently. But most definitely there is group work because we do reflect each other. We are reflections of each other. So maybe I don't know of something, but somebody else will say it, and then it will make me think. And I will say, oh, that's exactly what happened to me. And so I can relate and connect, because victims in general, and sexual violence, and especially, I don't know, this is what I work with, and Tuli can tell you later if it's not just right for sexual violence, but victims in general have a tendency to isolate themselves and to not be connected. They have a severe disconnection, and this disconnection is disconnection from themselves, disconnection from society, and ultimately disconnection from God or from the Supreme Being. And by sitting together in a group, they start to reconnect. Does that answer your question?
Chapter.
When
Yeah.
you speak about victim, you mean victim of someone that caused you something? Or let's say cancer patient.
No, sure.
He's
Somebody
also a
caused you
victim.
something. No, that's right. But in criminology, there are two answers to this question. One, I say, length or one scholars will say that criminology, that victimology deals with victims of a crime, meaning man-made, and some will say that victims can be all in general.
Because
that,
if you involve
maybe
God
we
in it, then cancer patient also should ask why.
Maybe we can add that
all victims ask
victim is a
themselves.
state of mind.
All victims ask themselves
Victimhood
that
is a
question.
state of mind. You can be a victim of cancer. You can be, you can see cancer as a challenge or as a gift, or victimhood is a state of mind. If you take Rabbi Dessler words in his wonderful book A Letter to Eliyahu, he says that when you move from self-centeredness, you move from victimization towards love and God, towards the word.
So it's not as a result of crime.
It's also a result.
Also a result of crime, and also by an act of God or
Whatever.
whatever appears to be accidental. But victimization is victimization. It is experienced usually in the same way. And this answer of why is this happening to me is always there. It's always there. But I want to tell you one more thing, and then I will leave it to Tuli. For me, I told the question was why. The therapist told me a similar thing that the women told me. They said, maybe we know the reason, maybe we don't, but we don't deal with the reason. What we do work with is the here and now. This is what's important. It's not what happened in the past. It's what is happening now and how we can work with it. This was the therapist's answer. And the spiritual leaders told me unanimously, the reason is not important. It doesn't matter why. And this was very frustrating for me because I seeked for the why. Until this one leader in particular told me this. He said, Sharon, you're asking the wrong question. And I said, okay, what's the right question? And he said, no, this is the right question, but it's not yours to ask. You cannot ask, nobody can give you an answer to this question, because the only one that can understand or that can get an answer to why do this or that happen to them is the person themselves. And I was thinking, okay, I said, okay, how and why. And then he told me, he said, do you know the story of Job, biblical Job? And I said, well, I know the story, but of course not as well as you, but I know the story. In Hebrew we have a saying that is Besorot Yov, that is Job's news. And if you get Besorot Yov, Job's news, you got really bad news. So everybody knows what is Job's news. And he said Job had a task, and he had a test that he needed to go to succeed. He said Job got 3 answers from his friends that told him that the terrible things that happened to him was because of this and that and that, and Job rejected all the answers that he got from men. And because he rejected, that was his test, so the men told me, because he rejected those answers, he got God's answer to why is this happening to him. Because he did not accepted their answer, he got God's answer. God revealed himself to him and told him, he said that he asked God 50 questions, then he answered him. So this is the story of Job. So this is maybe the most important book in the Bible that deals with those questions, with why do bad things happen. So from that, and I will finish with that, I got to thinking, because that wasn't the only time that Job was mentioned in the interviews. The women have mentioned him, and the therapists have mentioned him, and it got me to think and to come up with what I call now the Job syndrome. And the Job syndrome describes the lives of those victims, the women, in my research, but I think I'm sure that it can be applied to other victims. Okay. And so the Job syndrome takes the life of these victims, these women, and see, like maybe in 4 main points or stations or stages in Job's life, how there is a similarity and there is a parallelity to the path that Job ran through from being. I will tell you, like, just briefly the 4 points. The first one is being completely innocent, is being wholehearted, as Job is described. And the women in my research told me when I was a child, when I was a young girl, before I was victimized, I was wholehearted. I was one with God. I was an innocent creature. I was one with God. A lot of them spoke of being having already a strong perception of God, and living with the life of God in this life. So that was the first thing. The second thing was the life of despair. When Job, he reached a moment of total desperation, and they spoke of wanting to die and to, as I said before, step out of this world. Third stage was the point of the answer of rejecting them. Sorry, I forgot the third one, and I will get to it in a minute. That was the turning point. The third stage was a turning point, which Julie will elaborate on. And fourth stage and final was humility, a point of humility when they got and they realized that whatever is happening to them is something that maybe it needed to happen like that, maybe it's not, but it's not for them to look for the why. And the main thing is, what do they do with it? What is the meaning of it? What meaning do they put to it? And the meaning that they found for the women, they mostly call it an awakening moment. They were awakened. They found something was calling them. They had a calling, and this calling made them seek, made them look for God. And they did. They looked for a solution. They looked for a physical solution. They looked for a psychological solution. It took him as far as a certain point, but it didn't satisfy their need for an actual, for a more full, a whole solution. Is there a question?
Yeah, there's a question, Alexander.
Yeah.
Please let me finish this point.
Okay.
That's just one sentence, and I'm done. And so when they found the answer, when they found the answer from within, when they found God, they started living a life that was mainly guided by love. meaning by acceptance, accepting themselves, their victimization, their victimizers, and giving, a life of giving. And that's
Alexander.
I just wanted
sorry.
to ask you again, Sharon,
Yes.
for your the meaning of meaning.
Yes.
So what is your concept of meaning actually? Actually in our German discussion of pastoral care, we talk a lot about meaning making and what meaning might be, and sometimes it seems to be that meaning is kind of an abstract concept, like a sentence or something. I find, but I hear much more in what you say. So when you say meaning, it's more like a new self-perception and a new way of dealing with the world and with myself and with God in it. So it's much more than a sentence I could say or an answer I could give.
Yeah.
Or is it right? Is that
it's
what
more.
I
I think that there is that we define meaning from spiritual meaning. It's not just a meaning; it's a spiritual meaning, and a spiritual meaning, yes, is to live life by remembering all the time that there is a God, and that is where I want to go to, and that is where it's the reconnection, to reconnect with God, and to find meaning, to put meaning into my life, is to live life as if with all intentions, with intentions, with
In the path of what God.
in God's path, yes, of course, in God's path, and with full intention, with intention of what I'm doing. Does it bring me closer to God, or does it takes me farther away from Him?
You describe a new order of life, where the order now is God-centered.
Yeah.
So everything is explained by this, as you say.
Yes.
When Natti talked about at the beginning, when he invited you to look within you into unpleasant and pleasant experiences, what we try to help our clients do, and ourselves of course, otherwise we weren't there, is to not ask what is pleasant or not pleasant, what is closer to God, God of your understanding, God's path, what is on the way or out of the way. And if you see God as full of love, like we see it, and if we see God as not a punishing God, which is why many people are turning away from spirituality, from religious, and from other things. When we see God as full of love, you ask yourself, what would be more in the way of love than in the way of punishment and suffering? And pain is pain. Pain is inevitable, suffering is a choice. That's the second noble truth of the Buddha. So
There's a question.
No, sorry for stopping the question for a moment. As you see,
I'll be short.
the wine
Sorry.
parable is there because the wine becomes better and better. And Tuli will bring us more good wine,
Wow.
so I want him to have the
Just like
chance to do
Shabtai
it.
challenged you, you're
And,
challenging me. All right.
But one more sentence is just to continue your final sentence, and then the floor is yours. As said on Sunday, I call it Grace Way because the motto is to be the grace that we want to meet. And then, of course, we meet it by being the grace. To live the grace we want to meet, then we meet it. And of course, it is related to Gandhi's be the change that you want to bring, etc. So be the grace that you want to bring or be.
To get.
It's very small. I think I missed something. You introduced the idea of God to the people, or they brought
No, she
No, no,
described
no, no, no,
their
no.
own journey.
I
their own,
looked-
it was their
The-
own journey.
their own
Yes.
journey. their
I
own
looked
journey.
at particularly women who found a spiritual path to deal with their victimization. That was the population.
Okay, Tuli, please.
All right, so I'll try to be as short as can be so we can have more time for discussion. But basically, I'm as I said to Natti when we entered the room, I find myself amazed that I'm here, because basically I'm not religious, even raised by an agnostic atheist family, no God, nothing spiritual. We are natural beings, and when we die, we turn into atoms and go away. And I'm finding myself asking my clients, and many of my clients, about spirituality. And I want to take us towards the journey psychology and therapy took along the 120 years since Freud started the first session with, with the person. And what Freud did back then and there, he kicked out three major components of human reality. He kicked out the body. So in order to prove that you can talk people into health, he kicked out the brain, because he doesn't work with the brain. He works with the interpretations, and he doesn't want to know. He did not want to know what happens in the brain, and he kicked out God. And the body crept in the 70s, 80s. Crept in. We started to understand that basically inside us there are feelings and sensations that are relevant, and it's the same nervous system. And then the brain crept in when we had fMRI and MRI and all those things that we can peek into the brain, and now we understand where is trauma located. And I think that now we are on the third wave of something that spirituality and God are re-entering the therapy room, which is something that I find fascinating, because it was exactly what my journey was. Because I started my way as an army officer, spent 8 years in the army, a regiment commander at the end, and I did not know that I'm going to be a trauma therapist. But when I went out of the army, I started working with traumatized soldiers, and then with their families, and with the bereaved families. And I studied all therapies that were available. I think some of you are familiar with that: somatic experiencing, EMDR, narrative therapy, biofeedback, everything that science had to give to us. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. People healed up to a certain, glass ceiling that they couldn't get over that. And only when I came back from the 2014 war in Gaza, very much traumatized myself, looking for another way, because I try to cure or help my clients to be better. I try to make myself better. And then I encountered the 12-step therapy. The 12-step therapy, which is, basically for addictions, but trauma is addiction. And traumatic behavior is very much addictive. When you talk...
need the trauma.
When you...
Like the person feels that he needs the trauma.
He needs the trauma and the reaction to the trauma. Talk to violent... איך אומרים גברים מכים? Better man, the rage is addictive. The rage that males have towards, hitting their spouses is addictive. The shouting is addictive.
For the criminal, not for the victim.
No,
Also for the
but these
victim.
men were
For
victims of post-traumatic stress.
I'm dealing with people that have suffered from PTSD, from post-traumatic stress disorder.
So they were victimized, and then they victimized other people.
So basically,
they become abusive.
yes,
They became abusive.
Yeah. So basically, the question I asked myself is, what are the spiritual components of recovering from PTSD? Because basically, we have the physiological components, we have the psychological components, we know about the neurological components, we know all that, and we try to measure it and to put it into all those things. But what about spirituality? And it goes beyond meaning. It goes beyond meaning or something that is meaningful for them. And up till now, I met 38 men and women that are suffering from PTSD. But you know what? The ones that said, we are on a recovery process and we see spirituality as a major component, all have said one thing: it is still painful when we go there, when we have a flashback, when we have, and it doesn't matter if it's like a picture or a sound or a smell, when we have flashback, when we have avoidance, when we suffer from
Nightmares.
solitude or from nightmares or all that, it is painful, but we don't suffer. And this is something that came up of everyone, and it is not something that is said by people who have not taken spirituality therapy. Spiritual
Who
therapy.
introduced the spirituality to them? You did, or they
No,
did it
no,
later on
no.
before?
I cannot. You cannot.
Not in the research.
It's not. Not in the research, but I'm introducing it in my clinic. Of course, I introduce it.
So the people that didn't have the experience before, the spiritual experience,
I
in their
ask for
background,
people that see themselves as recovering from post-trauma and that consider spirituality as a major component of their recovery.
But I think in our practice sometimes
We do introduce. You know,
people with
in the last 4
spiritual-
years after studying this, the question of, when someone enters the clinic and says, I came to the clinic because I'm suffering from nightmares and flashbacks and avoidance since I saw my friend killed in an accident or in a bomb, or since I was attacked by smugglers, or something like that. And there are questions that we therapists fail to ask. And I think that we need to put them in. For example, the question is, okay, your friend died, what do you believe about death? And people are shocked when they are asked that because they are not used to being asked that question in therapy room. Because it's something personal. It's something that you don't talk about. Although I think I've interviewed, and I just came back from 2 weeks of speaking tour in the States in several churches, and I know that this is something that you would ask your spiritual guide. You would talk with him about death. What is it? But in therapy, especially for they come to a secular therapist, sort of a secular therapist, and then when you ask them, so what do you believe about this? They are shocked, and they ask themselves. And the other thing is, when you invite a person to look around, to reminiscence, to remember what was there when they were traumatized, and to look around, where is God? They find him. So the research that we do, Sharon and Natti and myself, is very practical. That's why we talk about practical spirituality, a day-to-day spirituality, because this is something that comes from the 12-step therapy. This is something that you do. You always look for God. What is God's intention in this? What is God's intention in this? And when someone has the feeling that there is an intention, that there is a caring, they have better chances of recovery. Now, the main thing that struck me, and we write about it now, a chapter in a book in Hebrew, but I'm sure that we'll revise it to English also, is about the sense of powerlessness. Every trauma, every person that went through trauma has had the sense of I'm powerless. I'm totally powerless against what's happened. And coming from trauma therapy, natural disasters are the most easiest to understand. I'm not to blame. And then it goes to disasters that have been inflicted or pain that was inflicted by man, and then you feel a bit, it's a more complicated trauma. And the most complicated is the ones that we work with are the sexually abused by their own family victims. And when you ask the question why, you always find themselves blamed. They blame themselves and guilty. Sense of guilt, sense of blame, sense of shame. But when you ask yourself, what was God's intention there for me? Not blaming God, but asking, then the sense of powerlessness disappears. Because we found out that sense of powerlessness exists in every trauma. And basically, Natti is the one to give us the primary powerlessness and secondary powerlessness. Primary powerlessness is something happened, I cannot prevent it.
No
For
one
example-
would like to be victimized. This is the basic
It's nobody's
assumption.
choice.
Yeah.
No one would like to be victimized. No one would like to have this painful experience. This is the primary powerlessness.
And if and if it seems that they like to do this, that they are asking for it, it means that they try to control.
I have a question.
And basically, we cannot control anything. I'll give you an example. Can you control whether or not I'll drop this glass now, this cup?
I can
And-
try.
Yeah, don't do it.
And you can ask me, but you cannot control this. This is the sense of you are powerless and controlless about what do I do. And if I drop it, with or without water, you are powerless and you have no control over your reactions. The one and only thing is that we can control what we react, what are our inner reactions to the fact that we are powerless and that we are powerless about our reactions. And then when we ask ourselves, what was God's intention here? Then we feel that we are not helpless. Because the combination, we need to differentiate between powerlessness and helplessness. Powerlessness is all over us. We are powerlessness about whether or not there will be the earthquake that I don't know if you know, but we talk about an earthquake every 107 years. We are in 115 years now, so we're waiting. There will be an earthquake. Okay? We are powerlessness. We are powerlessness about whether or not we react hysterically or calmly, because this reaction would come in a natural way. But we can control what we feel about this, and we can think what was God's intention.
Question.
And then, hold on, one last question, last sentence. The combination of powerlessness and helplessness is what creates despair. And people with PTSD often come with despair. But if you bring God into this picture, God of their understanding, I don't care if it is the great pasta machine. There is the congregation of the great pasta machine. You should know that. I think you know. Or you come from the Unitarian church. For me as a Jew, an Israeli Jew, I knew about Catholics and Protestants because we heard about Northern Ireland. And then I came to the state and I said, okay, I'm going to this Baptist church. I said, that's not a Baptist church, it's the Seventh-day Denomination of the something. And I said, we came to, there was this Unitarian church. Is this the Unitarian? No, this is the Unitarian church of this. So, Americans have the way. But anyway, everywhere you go, you find people looking for God's intention. And when you got in your powerlessness, the sense of there is an intention. So I'm not helpless anymore because there is someone there. Someone is there to help me, and I don't understand the way he helps me. And I cannot understand because, the
It's beyond the mind.
the ratio
It's not
between me as a person and God as a divine being is amazing. And in Judaism, many of my Jewish the people that I interviewed have mentioned a very interesting sentence in Judaism which they find very helpful to understand about fate, which is, maybe you could help me translate, הכל צפוי והרשות נתונה. Everything is predicted.
preordained, but you have volition.
You have
Freedom. Volition.
Volition.
so we I translate it as everything is preordained, but you have your freedom to choose whether or not to do something according to the intentions of God and love, or against the intentions of God and love. So basically, people felt that when they look for God and Spirit in the path to recover from post-trauma, then they regain sense of control, and they can fight with the sense of loneliness, because they are never alone anymore. So this is, and
Okay, you wanted to ask something?
I have the answer.
You got the answer already.
All right,
Okay.
that's the best.
Okay. Alexander, please.
May I ask once more? Thank you very much. You know, since we talked on Sunday, how much I like your work and what you do there. Two questions about God in this play. First of all, in my view at least, and when I read the Bible, God is sometimes not really helpful, but actually complicates things a lot. And if we have a God, maybe if Job wouldn't have had a God in the background, things might even have been easier. Read Job 23, where he says, if you just leave me alone, that's okay, but don't touch me anymore. So how do you deal with the God image you have here is a very functional God who actually helps, who is love, who is somehow good, who can help us to reintegrate.
Okay.
So how do you deal with my
Let's
problem?
begin with this.
Yes.
I never promised someone that if you meet God in your life, your life will be more pleasant.
Okay, that's good.
Because this is abusing God, or using God according to my own self-centeredness,
Pretending to know
or
God's
pretending to know.
intentions.
Pretending to know.
Pain is there, and pain can be there. What we can assure a person is that you will be in a better situation in this painful world. The only thing. And this is from experience.
I can add that I'm working with the Cult Survivors Center in Israel, and we have like many dangerous cults. And when you come with the notion of God there, people were severely traumatized by people abusing sense of God. So you need to go very slowly. It's a very treacherous land. But just like Natti said, when you say pleasant, unpleasant is earthly. But if you have a sense of spirituality, pleasant and unpleasant become pain or not pain, painful or not painful, but we don't know the intentions. And if you agree to not know the intentions and to follow God in their understanding. There's I can't remember the name of the author, but there's God's biography. Have anyone read God's biography? Where I think he follows the way we as human beings evolved in seeing God as a
Jack Miles?
Jack Miles, yeah.
Miles,
And maybe the biblical God, I agree, sometimes it complicates. we don't need a complication.
Tom?
Well, thank you for all three of you for the really inspiring work that you do. I have a question about self-centeredness and to God-centeredness. I before you began to talk about this, I would have thought that the victims are in part, they've lost their self. That they're trying to find their self. And my question is, you in your research, do people who are repairing and have found God, do they talk about, now I know who I am?
Most
Do they
definitely,
find
yes.
is that language also, that now I know who I am, I found myself, as well as found through God?
Yes, definitely yes. What they mostly talk about is finding God within themselves, and by finding God within themselves, they have found what I call and what some people call the true self.
The true self.
The true self.
So they
And not the
redefine
false
themselves.
self. You refine yourself. You reconnect, as I said, to yourself, to society, to God, and this connection goes it goes both ways. It goes. Somebody told me in a very, very nice. He put a very nice image to it. He said, "You go as high as you go and as deep as you can. So you go outside of yourself, and then you find the true self that is within yourself." Okay?
Jeremy, you wanted to ask something?
Well, the first thing is I just want to thank you all, because this is extraordinary and extraordinarily helpful. And I have two quick observations and then a question. So the first observation is, so you say, you know, the practice is not a theory, but it is guided by a reflective superstructure that you're trying to figure out, well, what works and what's really helpful, and what are the categories to think about this that can then guide my practice of therapy, right? So I think that's really significant, and theology is something like that for religion. But then the second thing is that I noticed that's interesting to me is you want to be careful, it seems like, not to impose a determinate kind of way of thinking about God or the transcendent upon the people you're trying to help. But at the same time, operationally, I mean, you have a kind of sense of what would be better and worse ways of imagining God if it's purely functional, because God is complicating your life. To put it a different way, turning from the problem of pleasure and pain to the problem of what's really worthwhile and how do I move forward now, in fact, does complicate your life in certain ways, right? It's not simply just making everything all easy and sweetness and light, because you may be required to change or do things you haven't been prepared to do up to now. Which leads me to the question that I kind of want to pose, and I'm wondering about the piece of reconciliation. So you're dealing with victims, and they've been victimized, and then some of them, in the case of the people you're working with, they've been victimized and in turn sometimes victimizers. So I'm wondering if you've kind of extended your research and therapy and reflection to the problem of reconciliation and how that process works in this healing path.
Okay. First, you reminded me with your observation, the second one, with a client of mine who told me, jokingly blaming me, you made me a serious person. That's what you call complicated.
Yeah.
Yes, because he began to think about the meaning of his action. And some people, when they go to Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, said the program took away my ability to enjoy drugs anymore. My
awareness stole my enjoyment of my ignorance.
I can't anymore enjoy it. So life became actually more complicated. Now, concerning reconciliation, of course, it's a big issue. We couldn't get into it now. And this is important, and this is there. For example, in Sharon's study, forgiveness was natural to these people on their journey. And even in the 12-step program,
mostly the people who work
it's
the 12
there.
steps,
Step 4, it's
for them.
about reconciliation with resentments. And step 8 is making, and 9 is making amends. Step 10 is also, so it is there on the recovery path that we borrow from Alcoholics Anonymous, and it is already there. Okay,
everybody, I'm sorry to have to do this, but please, let's pick up the questions and continue them at lunch.
Lunch is waiting for us.
Love to.
We are powerless.
Natti.